Bret Easton Ellis's novel American Psycho caused a shockwave from the moment it was published, and when adapted to the screen with Christian Bale's icy performance, it quickly became a pop culture icon. From memes and fan edits to endless debates, all revolve around the elusive figure of Patrick Bateman, a protagonist who is at once fascinating, horrifying, and disturbingly ambiguous. Ellis tells the story of Bateman, an investment banker living in Manhattan during its golden era. On the surface, he meets every standard of the elite, wealthy, articulate, walking as if the entire city belongs to him. But beneath that veneer lies an underground world known only to Bateman, where the elegance of Armani suits merges with frenzy and cold-blooded acts of violence. Notably, Ellis never confirms whether these crimes are real or simply the product of a fractured mind. That ambiguity makes everything even more terrifying. You cannot tell reality from illusion, just like Bateman himself. But if American Psycho were only about violence, it would not have become a classic. What makes the novel so often discussed is Ellis's use of Bateman as a prism through which to critique modern urban society, a world where material wealth becomes the measure of value, and reputation and appearance dominate the human mind. 1. Materialism and the idolatry of surface. Since the 19th century, many philosophers have worried that humans were losing their zest for life, falling into the emptiness we now call existential crisis. Some blamed the decline of religion, others looked at economic upheaval. Ellis proposes a different hypothesis. The existential despair of modernity stems from extreme materialism, a worldview that reduces all spiritual value to objects with price tags. For Bateman, material possessions are not just important, they are the only language he truly understands. Whenever he describes a person, he does not speak of character, history, or emotions. He speaks of the brand of their jacket, the style of their shoes, the fabric of their tie, sometimes even the price. Often he forgets or mixes up their names, but the Valentino jacket? Never. Going out to eat? He lists the cost of every dish. Buying furniture? He compares whether a chair costs more than expected. If anyone misjudges the value of an item, say, a $50,000 painting thought to be $20,000, Bateman instantly becomes cold and hostile. To him, it is not a mere miscalculation, it is an insult to his identity. At first glance, these traits might seem like mere obsession. But Ellis intends something deeper. It is the worship of material wealth that distorts Bateman's perception of the world. 2. When materialism dehumanizes, Bateman shows almost no empathy. People are not individuals with thoughts, feelings, hopes, or sorrows, they are literally objects. He sees life as a massive showroom. What is beautiful is acquired, what is old is discarded, and what obstructs him is eliminated. This is most apparent in his treatment of women. They are tools for pleasure, disposable commodities. And this objectification is fertile ground for the extreme violence Bateman may or may not commit. When you see others as objects, destroying them is no different than discarding a broken item. Ellis deliberately leaves the central question hanging. Does Bateman actually kill? Or is it all a hallucination of a man desperately seeking realness in an empty life? Regardless of the answer, we see what Ellis wants to highlight. When materialism is placed above humanity, cruelty emerges naturally, as a necessary consequence. It is no coincidence that Bateman stops his car in front of a meatpacking plant to pick up a prostitute. Ellis deliberately chooses this setting as a brutal metaphor. Bateman does not see her as a person but as a block of meat, a commodity, an object. Yet analyzing Bateman solely as a victim of materialism is not enough. He does not merely worship wealth, he is obsessed with aesthetics, a pathological form of aesthetics in which outward appearance becomes the sole measure of value. Bateman constantly seeks to construct a flawless image. The suit must fit perfectly, the hair must be styled correctly, the restaurant must meet exacting standards, and every possession must signal class. He wants to appear strong, wealthy, untouchable. This is the mask he wears before the world. And it is precisely this obsession that underpins his tragic condition. If you look closely, Bateman does not reduce everything to material possessions, he reduces everything to appearances. To him, other people are not merely objects, they are accessories, decorations, for his aesthetic world. Their value lies in how they reflect the image Bateman wants to project. This is evident from the very beginning of the novel. Bateman and his friends mock a man they know to be wealthier than themselves. They call him short, unattractive. If Bateman were only obsessed with money, this reaction would make no sense. But in his value system, simply appearing more attractive than someone else is enough to make him feel superior. Here, materialism merges with formalism, a profoundly twisted aesthetic morality. Moreover, Bateman takes extreme pride whenever he is mistaken for an actor or model, an indication of his desperate craving to be noticed. The moment he meets Tom Cruise perfectly illustrates this. Cruise is handsome, wealthy, and a global superstar, superior to Bateman by every measure that matters. Bateman practically shrinks in response, adopting a forced humility. He cannot place himself above someone like Cruise, and this causes him discomfort bordering on humiliation. Conversely, one of his first victims is a homeless man Bateman views as pathetic, filthy, and contemptible, not simply because he is poor, but because he fails to meet Bateman's aesthetic standards. Aesthetics become a form of morality. Whoever looks worthy has value. Whoever does not, does not. This is precisely Ellis's point. Bateman lives by the logic of a commodity market, where intrinsic value does not exist. Only surface value matters, only what others are willing to pay for it. Humans become products, items for trade, and this commodification of humanity is the core critique Ellis weaves throughout the novel. Yet this obsession with aesthetics is a double-edged sword. It traps Bateman in a painful paradox. On one hand, he wants to treat people as objects so he can control and discard them. On the other hand, the very appearance of others determines his own self-worth. Beauty or attractiveness is not an inherent trait, it is defined by the gaze of others. This is why Bateman suffers. He needs their eyes, their compliments, their validation. He obsesses over every detail. Whether his hair is thinning, whether he gets a good table at a restaurant, whether women find him attractive. He simultaneously sees them as designer-clad pieces of meat and desperately craves their approval. Bateman slides between two opposing states, viewing humans as objects and viewing them as mirrors of himself. This oscillation is the root of his tragedy, a man living in glittering Manhattan yet empty inside, torn between the desire to dominate and the fear of being judged inferior. In one chapter, Bateman sees people as mindless objects. In the next, he trembles before every judgmental glance. His mind struggles to maintain these contradictory poles simultaneously, and eventually, it completely fractures. Bateman cannot separate himself from the Bateman persona he has meticulously constructed, a self born solely to manage how others perceive him. The real human being is lost within the image he dons each day. The irony is stark. Although he constantly claims he does not care about anyone, Bateman is utterly dependent on them, on their gaze, on their judgment. And this helplessness triggers a very specific pattern of behavior. But before diving into that, the original text inserts a Squarespace ad, so we can skim past it briefly and return to the most important point, the psychological structure that propels Bateman into the cycle of fantasy, violence, power. Imagination, violence, and power. One of Friedrich Nietzsche's major ideas is the notion of revenge rich in imagination. This occurs when a person lacks real power and instead seeks a sense of control by constructing violent or victorious scenarios in their mind. Nietzsche often discussed how the weak redefine morality to turn impotence into an advantage. But the idea is broader. Anyone who feels dispossessed tends to retreat into a world of imagination to reconstruct a sense of strength. For Bateman, this becomes central to his mental unraveling. Near the end of the novel, clues suggest that many of the murders Bateman recounts may never have happened. Paul Owen, the man Bateman claims to have killed, is in fact alive and even had lunch in London a few days prior. An acquaintance even comments that Bateman could never accomplish anything truly fearsome. He is stupid and cowardly. In other words, the entire massacre may be an illusion, a complex inner world Bateman constructs to cope with the suffocating impotence in his life. This aligns with psychological research by Manuel Eisner. People who feel weak, vulnerable, or controlled, especially bullied children, tend to imagine extreme acts of violence. These fantasies often far exceed the reality of the situation, and Eisner suggests they may be remnants of a primitive survival mechanism, where fantasizing about revenge once prepared the mind for real violence. He also notes that attacks on personal identity are among the strongest triggers. And this brings us back to Bateman. Looking at his list of victims, a pattern emerges. They all represent the power Bateman craves but can never attain. They appear more attractive, wealthier, more confident, or simply indifferent to him. Paul Owen is the most illustrative example. Owen manages a more important account, is more successful, lives more comfortably. Bateman admires him yet resents the feeling of being overshadowed. He allows Owen to misremember his name repeatedly while remaining polite. He probes how Owen conducts business, manages accounts. On some level, Bateman wants to be Owen. Yet this admiration also makes him feel petty and powerless, as if the entire image of the young, successful, untouchable man Bateman has constructed collapses right before him. This strikes directly at his fragile sense of identity. As Nietzsche explains, when one's identity is threatened, the mind turns to imagination as a form of revenge. And so, in Bateman's mind, Owen must die. Not because Bateman is a cold-blooded killer, but because it is the only way for him to reclaim power over someone he simultaneously desires and fears. Here, violence becomes the self-proclaimed assertion of power by the powerless. Thus, in Bateman's psyche, Owen must die. It is the only way to resolve the inner conflict eating at him. By imagining he has eliminated Owen, who in reality is simply in London on business, Bateman temporarily restores a sense of control. If we assume the murder were real and he got away with it, it would represent the ultimate self-assertion, proof that when pushed to his limits, Bateman could overpower his rival. But because it all occurs in his mind, these feats are merely fragile cards in a house of illusions, helping him preserve the last scraps of self-esteem. This also mirrors how he imagines killing women. Bateman is intensely obsessed with how others perceive him, but his greatest anxiety comes from women. He constantly seeks their reassurance, that his hair looks fine, that he is attractive. Even failing to secure a restaurant reservation for a date can nearly send him into panic. Like many men, Bateman obsesses over women's perception of him, and this directly impacts his identity and self-worth. It is therefore unsurprising that the majority of the crimes he imagines revolve around revenge on women and attempts to control them sexually. I will not describe these scenes in detail. They are brutal and inappropriate for YouTube, but the pattern is consistent. Bateman only strikes after constructing a fantasy in which the women admire and desire him. He must first be worshipped before committing violence. Strangely, this motivation mirrors his obsession with Owen, impotence arising from fixation on others' perceptions, and the effort to reclaim power through violence, whether real or imagined. Ironically, it was Bateman's flawed worldview, one that placed appearance and image above all else, that made him obsessively dependent on the opinions of others. And this is what made him feel powerless. The power struggles that Bateman so passionately pursued mostly existed only in his mind. Take the famous scene with the business cards. His friends also bragged, competed, and flaunted, but they weren't trapped in the same frenzied spiral as he was. They desired status and power like he did, but no one took it to the extreme, where the lives of others became disposable if inconvenient. Much of Bateman's violence was directed at the homeless, easy targets that allowed him to reassure himself that he still had power. They were vulnerable, difficult to resist, making them the perfect material for the illusions Bateman created. He delighted in their despair and fear because it proved he could harm them without consequence. Ultimately, even this psychopathic persona that Bateman adopted was itself a form of power fantasy. The first time he acknowledged being a psychopath was when someone else called him the boy next door and complimented his kindness. Amid simmering anger and a longing to be recognized as dangerous, Bateman likely wanted to believe he was the cold, ruthless archetype described near the end of the book, because that gave him a sense of strength greater than anything else. Whatever the reason, Bateman would rather become a psychopath, because in his imagination, it represented a form of power he could never truly attain. A psychopath, as Bateman idealized, cared nothing for others' opinions, was bound by neither conscience nor law, acted on his own terms, and could not be stopped. In Bateman's eyes, such a figure rose above all petty moral codes, moving through the world like a lion among sheep. Of course, this was only the version in his mind. In reality, this illusion isn't unfamiliar. It's just an extreme iteration of the desire for power that many of us have fleetingly imagined. Absolute independence, freedom from everyone else's expectations. Bateman merely took it to a pathological extreme. It's no surprise that online, many people idolize Bateman. They buy into the power he imagined for himself, yet they fail to see the emptiness, suffering, and despair lurking beneath that glossy exterior. From this perspective, Bateman becomes almost a pitiable figure. If the crimes in the book are read not as fact but as the delusions of a completely powerless man, trapped in his obsession with others' judgment, and struggling to reclaim a shred of fragile authority, then American Psycho takes on an entirely different meaning. It is no longer the story of a deranged killer, but the story of a man who wishes he could become one. Even in that imagined world, however, Bateman remains imprisoned by a flawed view of life, one that elevates material over human value, appearance over essence. This underscores the destructive power of overvaluing appearances. Bateman's philosophy of life is so thin that it shatters at the slightest touch, yet it perfectly illustrates what happens when a person places all self-worth on a glamorous surface. Underscore 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 3. Truth, reality, and nihilism. Nihilism can be interpreted in many ways, but here, let's understand it simply. It is the attitude that something has no value. A political nihilist thinks participating in politics is meaningless. A religious nihilist believes God does not exist, or that the question is unworthy of concern. In Bateman's case, his nihilistic attitude extends to nearly every aspect of life, leaving him not just miserable but utterly lost. As we've seen, Bateman cares about nothing beyond self-worship. He doesn't concern himself with others except insofar as they reflect the greatness he craves. He cares nothing for work unless it grants him more power or money. He believes in no ideals, pursues no goals, he exists solely to serve his ego. This is absolute nihilism toward everything outside himself, a pure form of selfishness. Yet most strikingly, living this way brings Bateman no joy. His life is empty, monotonous, and emotionally dead. The novel's narrative voice reflects this perfectly. Bateman describes possessions, prices, brands, but completely devoid of emotion. He observes the world around him with meticulous detail, yet reveals no trace of feeling or attachment. Everything in his life is presented as a set of specifications: no soul, no color, no weight. We only see fleeting fragments of Bateman's daily sense of life. Occasionally, he blurts out that he hates his job, or that he can't stand Evelyn, a woman who is nominally his girlfriend, but in reality is just part of the social performance he is compelled to play. Bateman places no value on loyalty. He cheats casually with his friend's girlfriend and shows no concern when he suspects that Evelyn may be sleeping with one of the men in his circle. The thought passes quickly, disappearing as if it were not even worth further consideration. Days pass for Bateman in a blur, dull, meaningless, with no anchor. His life resembles an endless play that he has no desire to perform. For Bret Easton Ellis, this is a projection of the rat race in a major city. No matter how high you climb, if you measure life by wealth, status, and appearance, the summit is still an empty, cold void. By any material measure, Bateman's life is enviable: money, status, looks, designer brands, upscale restaurants. But this is merely an external perspective. Inside, Bateman feels no joy. This stands in stark contrast to the moments when he descends into violence, whether real or imagined. Bateman admits that these are the only times he feels truly alive. His narrative voice suddenly becomes intense, energetic, no longer monotonous or indifferent as in the rest of the story. Violence, however pathological, gives Bateman a sense of significance, a place where every decision carries weight, where life and death create a clear boundary. It touches a primal instinct that the soulless banking world never grants him. But as we shall see, even that sensation fades quickly. The most dangerous aspect of Bateman's nihilism is not merely his disregard for external values, but his disbelief in truth itself. To Bateman, appears to be, and actually is, are identical. Truth is irrelevant, deceiving others, and himself, is enough. If he convinces others that he is important, glamorous, or famous, then in his conception, that becomes reality. This is also why he is particularly fascinated with Jean, his secretary. Jean is from a lower social stratum, and in her eyes, Bateman seems like a perfect archetype. In her presence, he can believe he is a true king. Yet by relying on these fleeting illusions, Bateman's psyche grows increasingly hollow. Value based on appearance is, by nature, ephemeral. This has been stated since Plato, by the Stoics, and in countless religious traditions. Appearances can change overnight, after a stressful day, or in a distracted moment. If one bases self-worth on these fragile things, one is forced to believe oneself in constant flux, while truth remains unchanged. For Bateman, dependence on appearance prevents him from building any stable structure in life. Time becomes flat, without climaxes or highlights, and existence turns into a formless, drifting mist. Worse, because Bateman's exterior never aligns with his inner reality, he always lives in fear of exposure. This is why even something as trivial as failing to set the dinner table can make him break down. Not because the matter is serious, but because it threatens to shatter the entire facade he has painstakingly constructed. A small crack can bring down the whole artificial persona. Perhaps sometimes, Bateman even fears recognizing the truth about this deceit himself. By the end of the novel, Patrick Bateman is completely disoriented. He can no longer grasp any clue about who he is, even at the most basic level. Ellis allows Bateman to articulate his nature, an abstraction, a distorted shadow without a true self. One can shake his hand, touch the flesh, but inside, it is completely empty. A fabrication. A mistake. A human without contingency. That is, no depth, no inner life, only an artificial shell constructed to suit a role. By day, Bateman maintains the image of a polite, urbane player. By night, he transforms into a genuine psychopath. But when Kahn's lawyer reveals that he had lunch with Paul Owen only a week ago, meaning Bateman could not have killed Owen, the entire simulated world begins to crumble. Bateman confesses everything. He claims to have killed dozens of people and that he enjoyed it. If Bateman truly believes he committed those crimes, then his confession becomes an act of absolute self-destruction. Because if what he says is true, a search of his apartment would reveal all the evidence. And in that case, everything would be over. This leaves us with two possibilities. 1. Bateman knows that he has never actually killed anyone. His confessions are then a desperate attempt to salvage a crumbling ego when confronted with overwhelming denial, the denial of others regarding the story he has tried to maintain. 2. Or Bateman truly believes he has committed murder. In that case, he is willing to go to prison, as long as no one can disprove the image he has constructed for himself. Whichever way you interpret it, the tragedy remains the same. Bateman values appearance over reality, and reality ultimately fights back. Someone who believes themselves invincible will awaken at the first punch to the face. The same goes for Bateman. When he places weight on image rather than truth, everything becomes so fragile that the slightest impact can shatter it. Bateman's total detachment from reality is the logical consequence of the philosophy he pursues. It allows him to place his illusions on the same plane as verifiable events. He blurs the lines so completely that he cannot distinguish them. To Bateman, the world is not a shared reality but a media battlefield where each individual attempts to impose their version of the truth onto others. There is no truth, only belief. No world, only fragmented impressions. To exist is to be seen. But by disregarding everything beyond appearances, Bateman loses the final foundation for holding on to reality. And this is Ellis's warning. Not everyone who lives like Bateman will descend into madness, but such an attitude inevitably leads to instability. One of American Psycho's unique features is its unreliable narrator. In Bateman's case, the problem is even more extreme. For him, the concepts of reliable or unreliable do not exist. There are only narrators who can sustain their story and those who cannot. Life becomes an endless presentation in which everyone tries to perform the perfect role. Ultimately, what remains in the work, and what applies beyond the book, is the emptiness of hollow promises. Since ancient times, philosophers have warned that suffering is unavoidable. Humans are prone to overvalue wealth, fame, or others' admiration, as if attaining them alone would guarantee happiness. Bateman represents an extreme example. When these things are misplaced, they backfire and can lead one into an abyss. He is the epitome of a person trapped in the cycle. He possesses more wealth than most around him, everything others desire, yet the moment he attains something new, any sense of happiness evaporates. Material possessions serve only as tools to compete with others, not to satisfy himself. He wants to succeed more than everyone else, yet even he does not know why. Viewed through René Girard's lens, Bateman is caught in a cycle of mimetic desire. He does not know what he truly wants. He only craves what others desire. He does not genuinely want a business card. He wants one so perfect that it provokes envy. He buys a leather briefcase simply because a friend just bought one. The restaurant he chooses, the clothes he wears, the appointments he keeps, all reflect the desires of others. Not a single desire originates from within. This alienates Bateman from himself so profoundly that the question, "What do I truly want?" becomes incomprehensible. He has spent his life performing a role, and now cannot escape it. Bateman descends into a dark version of what Epicurus called the hedonic wheel. Humans continually expand desires, generating ever larger needs. But Bateman cannot even feel the small comfort of a desire that is truly his own. They are all borrowed from others, unconsciously treated as his. At first, his psychological demeanor, or outward indifference, seems advantageous, shielding him from the void. Yet it becomes a false companion. Violent outbursts bring temporary exhilaration, but they are still just performances. Despite Bateman's repeated claim that his true self is a psychopath, we can be nearly certain this is false. It does not align with how others perceive him. Moreover, at his most instinctive moments, Bateman begins speaking about himself in the third person, a clear sign that he has alienated himself to the point of being unable to use the pronoun I anymore. Whether real or imagined, violence only fragments Bateman's mind further. What was once a mental tool to cope with powerlessness in real life has now become his sole reason for existence, yet it remains a pursuit of novelty. He requires increasingly savage acts of violence to recreate the initial thrill. Like the Marquis de Sade in his prison cell, Bateman must imagine ever more depraved, boundary-pushing scenes to fill an unfillable void. But this does more than alienate him from himself. It blocks any possibility of connecting with others. At first, his disregard for the inner lives of others may seem like a form of power, allowing him to pursue goals ruthlessly, without concern for consequences. Yet this very attitude nurtures the profound loneliness that haunts him. Evidence appears in the rare moments when he admits having nothing in common with anyone, longing for peace, love, friendship, understanding, or even the simple ability to integrate into human society. Bateman's basic need for interpersonal connection is never met. This stems both from the environment he inhabits, shallow, selfish, superficial, and from his own extreme, unquestioning approach. He accepts everything uncritically and even pushes it to extremes. Coincidentally, at the start of the book, graffiti reads, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," a direct reference to Dante's Inferno, where similar words are inscribed above the gates of hell. Like the sins in Inferno, Bateman's approach promises pleasure but delivers none. Bateman believes that the status and power he accumulates will bring happiness, yet in reality, they only deepen his suffering. The more he sacrifices himself for what others desire, the more he propels himself into a race whose purpose even he does not understand. He is wealthier, more powerful, and more influential than most could dream of, yet he remains relentlessly miserable. In many narratives, such circumstances might lead to insight. The character recognizes the error and changes course. Not so with Bateman. He never concludes that his value system is flawed. Instead, he believes that more status, fame, money, and power can fix everything. He plunges into the hell of his own making, and in his mind, the only way forward is to dig deeper. This mirrors a sad reality in society. How many people realize they are on a path of self-destruction and turn back, compared to those who stubbornly persist until every other way of living becomes unimaginable? Bateman's greatest tragedy is that his entire journey is founded on hollow promises. The life of a banker promises wealth, possessions, appearance, yet brings no true joy. The psychopathic persona he constructs, the dangerous killer, cannot restore either power or passion. Ultimately, the book's final lines suggest that Bateman is unlikely to find a way out, marking complete deadlock. Beneath the confident, wealthy, powerful exterior, Bateman is a pathetic figure. Ellis opens the novel with a quote from Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, and beneath the glossy surface, Bateman resembles a Dostoevskian antihero, angry, miserable, and nihilistic, only with the added ability to cloak himself in beauty, the one thing he truly values. As he says, "I feel awful, but I look great." That shimmering exterior sometimes causes readers or viewers to forget the festering wounds within his soul.